At 9:30 a.m. on August 1st, 1944, near Avranches, George S. Patton was receiving the formal activation orders for the U.S. Third Army as American units continued pouring through the narrow breakout corridor opened by Operation Cobra. Trucks, tanks, and artillery pieces move in a near-continuous stream, and staff officers watch the flow with a mix of relief and pressure, knowing the entire campaign now depends on speed and control. Patton had been waiting for this moment for months. He had trained, argued, and pushed for a war of movement, not a slow grind across hedgerows. Now the front was breaking open. To Patton, this was not a chance for a clean victory. It was a chance to trap an enemy army before it could recover. His instructions were clear: exploit the rupture, drive hard, and keep driving until the Germans either collapsed or escaped. The Third Army's initial movements were aimed south and west into Brittany, but Patton's mind was already tracking the larger opportunity east and north toward the German flank and rear. Over the same hours, Omar Bradley, newly commanding the U.S. 12th Army Group, had to make decisions with incomplete information and constant risk. The breakthrough had succeeded, but success created its own danger. Stretched supply lines, disorganized roads, and units advancing faster than maps could be updated. Bradley understood that if the Americans moved too quickly without coordination, they could become vulnerable to counterattack. Still, he also knew the Germans were in no shape to absorb another blow. The strategic logic was simple. Once an army begins losing coherence, pressure must be maintained without pause. Across the lines, German headquarters officers were trying to rebuild a front that no longer existed. Adolf Hitler's orders continued to demand holding ground and launching counterattacks, even as German divisions were already weakened from weeks of fighting in Normandy. German commanders expected an American advance, but they anticipated something slower, something they could measure, track, and react to. What they were witnessing instead was a sudden expansion of the battlefield. American armor and motorized infantry were not just pushing forward, they were appearing in places German planners had assumed were still safely behind their lines. This was not only a failure of German strength, it was a failure of German decision-making. The German command system in the West was strained by competing authority, rigid directives, and the constant expectation that willpower could substitute for fuel, ammunition, and intact units. When the Allies broke out, German withdrawals were supposed to be managed and temporary. But the speed of Patton's movement meant the retreat was turning into something more dangerous, a loss of control over time and distance. German staff work depended on predictable rates of march, clear boundary lines, and stable communications. Patton's advance attacked all three. American columns moved around resistance points rather than stopping to crush them immediately, leaving pockets of German troops cut off and confused. Road junctions became lifelines. Bridges became decisive objects. A single lost crossing could force a division to detour, and a detour could mean being overtaken and destroyed. In the first days, many German officers did not yet have a clear picture of what was happening. They only knew that American forces were showing up farther east than expected, and faster than their reports could be confirmed. In practical terms, the Germans began to experience a specific kind of battlefield shock, the realization that rear areas were no longer rear areas. What if George S. Patton turned this breakout into a full encirclement before German command could even understand the shape of the threat? By the time evening approached, the U.S. advance was no longer just a pursuit. It was becoming a race to decide whether a German army would escape. Because once Patton was behind them, the war in France would start ending in days, not months. Patton's armored columns pushed forward with a kind of disciplined impatience, moving through crossroads towns and open stretches where the battlefield no longer looks like Normandy. His Third Army is no longer testing the German line, it is moving past it. In headquarters tents and radio trucks, the reports change tone, less about fighting for ground, more about seizing road networks before the enemy can use them to escape. At Argentan, American forces reach a point that matters far beyond the town itself. This is the southern hinge of what could become a massive encirclement, with Canadian and British forces pressing down from the north toward Falaise and the Americans positioned to close the gap from below. For German units still trapped inside, every hour matters. Their formations are already wounded. Infantry moving on foot, tanks short of fuel, artillery abandoned when trucks cannot reach them. They are still dangerous, but they are starting to lose the ability to act as a coordinated army. For Patton, the operational logic is direct. He believes the trap can be closed quickly, and that hesitation will allow German forces to slip out, regroup, and fight again closer to Germany. His method is to push armored spearheads forward and trust speed to create opportunities. It is not recklessness. It is an understanding that once a retreat begins under pressure, the retreat itself can become the most vulnerable moment an army will ever face. But Omar Bradley is watching the same map with different risks in mind. American units are advancing at high tempo, and the front lines of multiple Allied armies are converging toward the same space. Coordination between ground forces and air power is complicated. Communications are imperfect. The danger of friendly fire is not theoretical. It is a lived reality in every fast-moving operation. Bradley also carries the responsibility of the broader campaign. He cannot allow Patton's drive to become uncontrolled, and he cannot gamble an entire American army on a narrow corridor filled with mixed Allied movements. Bradley's choice to halt Patton's advance short of a full closure at Argentan becomes one of the most debated decisions of the campaign. He is balancing operational opportunity against command certainty. A clean encirclement would be decisive, but a chaotic collision of forces could also be catastrophic. The Americans are not just fighting the Germans, they are fighting the limits of planning, the limits of logistics, and the limits of coordination between armies moving faster than doctrine was designed to handle. Inside the narrowing escape route, German soldiers and commanders begin making choices that reveal the true human cost of operational collapse. Vehicles jam roads, units intermingle without clear hierarchy, wounded men are left behind when trucks cannot stop. Staff officers attempt to restore order, but order is fragile when air attacks strike columns in daylight and bridges become choke points. Many German troops have been awake for days, moving under constant threat, and the exhaustion is no longer just physical. It becomes cognitive. Men stop understanding where they are in the battle. This is where German leadership begins to realize the meaning of Patton's speed. It is not simply an advance, it is an attack on their ability to coordinate time. When an army cannot predict where the enemy will appear, every plan becomes obsolete the moment it is issued. What if Omar Bradley had let Patton drive north from Argentan and fully close the pocket before the Germans could organize an escape route? The corridor remains open, but it is tightening. German forces continue to pour through it, losing tanks, guns, and men along the way. Even those who escape do so in a condition that no longer resembles a fighting force. The battle is no longer about holding France. It is about surviving the next few miles. And as the gap shrinks, the German army in the West begins to understand something that cannot be fixed by orders. The Americans are no longer chasing them from the front. They are moving into their rear faster than the German command can react. Walter Model arrives to take command in the West with a reputation built on crisis management. He is known as a commander who can stabilize chaos, who can impose discipline on collapsing fronts, and who can extract battered units from disasters without losing the whole army. But as he studies the situation in Normandy and the widening breakout, the problem in front of him is not a weak line that needs reinforcement. It is an entire operational structure coming apart under pressure. Model's first task is to understand what still exists. German divisions are no longer clean formations on a map. Many are fragments, missing leadership, missing transport, missing fuel. Some units are separated from their supply and command posts. Others are simply moving west to east in whatever groups can still move. Model's staff tries to build a coherent picture, but the battlefield is changing too quickly, and Allied air power disrupts movement whenever daylight allows. At the top of the chain, Adolf Hitler continues issuing orders as if the situation can still be controlled by will and rigidity. He demands counterattacks and the holding of ground that no longer has strategic value. He wants the Allies pushed back as if Normandy is still a contest of line versus line, not a pursuit where time and mobility are decisive. In the field, the reality is brutally different. German commanders cannot launch major counterattacks without fuel, without intact armor concentrations, and without secure roads. What remains of their mechanized power is being spent in defensive withdrawals, not offensive action. Model understands that the most dangerous moment is not the initial breakthrough, it is what comes after, the phase when a retreat begins and then accelerates. Armies do not collapse only from casualties. They collapse when they lose the ability to coordinate. In France, that breakdown is being driven by three forces at once: Allied firepower, Allied air dominance, and American speed. By mid-August, German headquarters officers begin reporting sightings and contact points that make no sense if the front is stable. American units are appearing deep on roads where German planners assumed only their own troops could be moving. Patton's forces are not waiting for the slow reduction of strongpoints. They are bypassing them, cutting routes, and forcing German columns to reroute into already crowded roads. Each reroute creates more congestion, and congestion under air attack becomes destruction. Model's role becomes less about obedience to Hitler's plans and more about damage control. He must keep an escape route open long enough for as many German units as possible to get out. But he is trying to do that with an army that has fewer and fewer functional vehicles, fewer functioning radios, and fewer commanders who can reliably control what is still under their authority. In the German system, delays in reporting and conflicting authority between headquarters can be fatal. Speed punishes hesitation. The deeper fear inside German command is psychological. The men responsible for moving entire armies begin to sense that they are no longer directing events. They are reacting to them. When Patton's forces reach unexpected points, it forces German leaders to question whether their own understanding of the battlefield is even real. A commander can fight an enemy he can see. He cannot fight a situation he cannot define. This is the point at which many German officers begin to speak in operational terms that sound like disbelief. The Americans are in places they should not be. They are cutting routes that were supposed to remain open. They are arriving before German units can even complete their next movement order. For men trained in precision and schedule, this is not simply dangerous. It is destabilizing. If Walter Model could have consolidated a defensive line sooner, could he have slowed Patton's exploitation enough to preserve German cohesion and prevent catastrophe? Model does manage to prevent total annihilation. The Germans will not all be destroyed inside the pocket, but the price is enormous. Equipment is lost in quantities the German army cannot replace: tanks, guns, trucks, ammunition, and communications gear. The men who escape do so exhausted, disorganized, and increasingly aware that the campaign in France has already shifted from a contest of strength to a contest of time. And Patton is still moving. Patton's headquarters keeps shifting forward because staying still risks losing contact with his own momentum. His commanders and staff officers follow the roads east, managing traffic, fuel dumps, and prisoner handling while still trying to keep armored divisions pointed toward the next objective. This kind of pursuit is not glamorous. It is administrative violence, moving faster than the enemy can think and forcing them to surrender simply because they cannot find a way to regroup. Patton's approach relies on one central belief: once the German retreat begins, it must be turned into a rout. He drives hard not only to take ground but to seize decision points, bridges, junctions, and choke routes before German columns can use them. When American troops capture crossings intact, they keep the advance alive. When bridges are blown, engineer units are pushed forward under pressure to restore mobility quickly. The constant push creates strain. Vehicles break down. Crews go without sleep. Officers make rapid decisions with incomplete knowledge. But Patton accepts those costs because the payoff is operational collapse on the enemy side. German troops moving through the escape corridor do not experience the battle as a clean front line. They experience it as sudden contact from unexpected directions. A unit expects to see Americans to the west and instead finds them on the flank or behind. Some German soldiers realize they are surrounded only when they reach a road junction and see American vehicles already there. Others learn it when their retreat route is blocked by burning wrecks from earlier attacks. In those moments, surrender becomes less a political decision and more a practical one. Men who have no ammunition, no transport, and no clear route out are not choosing ideology. They are choosing survival. Walter Model keeps pushing staff work forward, demanding reports and reorganizing commands that are no longer stable. He is trying to build a defensive line while the army underneath him is still escaping. He understands that the front cannot be rebuilt until the retreat stops, but stopping the retreat too early could cause the remaining forces to be trapped and destroyed. His decisions are measured against minutes and miles, and he knows that Allied air power, especially in daylight, punishes every delay. This is where the German command realizes what it means for Patton to be behind them. It is not simply that American tanks are on roads the Germans need, it is that the German army is losing its internal confidence. A retreating formation needs a belief that its rear is safe enough to reorganize. Patton removes that belief. German staff officers try to reroute units, but rerouting means entering unknown roads, and unknown roads in a collapsing campaign often lead directly into American hands. On the Allied side, Omar Bradley remains cautious, watching for overstretch and the risk of an American force outrunning its supply. He understands that operational speed can create a fragile army if fuel and ammunition do not keep up. He also knows that Patton's personal energy can pull units forward even when their maintenance and logistics are strained. For Bradley, the danger is not only the German army, it is the possibility that the American advance could lose coherence and hand the Germans a chance to stabilize. The Germans do escape a complete annihilation in the pocket, thousands break out, but what they leave behind is decisive. Many of their remaining tanks, much of their artillery, and large numbers of vehicles and heavy weapons. An army can survive losing men. It cannot easily survive losing the tools that allow it to fight as an organized force. The withdrawal from Normandy became a transformation of the German army in the West into a damaged remnant. What if George S. Patton had been given full freedom to drive his Third Army even deeper into the German rear without operational limits? By the time the surviving Germans reach safer ground, they are not celebrating escape. They are counting what is left. They are seeing columns of men without vehicles, units without officers, and formations that now exist only in paperwork. The war in France is not ending because the Germans have been defeated in a single clean battle. It is ending because they can no longer coordinate the fight, and Patton's advance has made that fact impossible to ignore. The survivors of the German escape move east in scattered groups, crossing open ground, broken roads, and damaged bridges while American pressure continues behind them. Many of the men who make it out do not look like a functioning army. They are hungry, exhausted, and moving with little equipment beyond what they can carry. Officers try to count units that no longer exist in the way they did weeks earlier. Staff work becomes a search for fragments, collecting stragglers, rebuilding companies from remnants, and finding any transport still capable of moving. As German forces pull back toward the Seine, the retreat becomes a second battle. The river crossings are crucial because a withdrawal without secure bridges can become a trap as deadly as any encirclement. Under constant Allied air attack and artillery pressure, German engineers struggle to keep crossings open long enough for men and vehicles to pass. Traffic jams form under fire. Some units are forced to abandon equipment simply to get bodies across. The German command is now fighting for time, not for decisive ground. It is trying to preserve enough combat power to form a new line closer to the German border. On the Allied side, the pace of events accelerates in ways few planners had predicted. American forces are not just pursuing, they are overtaking. Patton's Third Army continues moving with the urgency of a commander who believes the enemy must not be allowed to breathe. His units seize towns and junctions, collect prisoners, and push forward again. The pursuit creates its own burden. Soldiers are driving long hours, sleeping in brief intervals, and maintaining vehicles under constant strain. Fuel convoys and ammunition columns become as essential as tanks, because without them, momentum stops instantly. Omar Bradley's operational problem becomes one of control. Success creates exposed flanks and stretched supply lines. Rapid advances can leave pockets of German resistance behind, which still threaten roads and rear areas. Bradley must make sure the American push remains sustainable and does not fracture into isolated thrusts. His discipline is not caution for its own sake. It is the understanding that even a defeated enemy can recover if given space and time. For Walter Model, the aftermath is a grim calculation. He has prevented the complete destruction of the Western German armies, but he has not preserved their strength. The German army in France has lost a vast amount of its heavy equipment, and the loss is permanent. Germany's industry cannot replace it quickly enough, and the Allies now control the skies and the initiative. Model is forced to build defensive positions with weakened divisions and damaged morale, all while receiving orders from Adolf Hitler that remain detached from the battlefield's limits. This is what the Germans learned too late in France. An army can endure terrible casualties and still fight, but once it loses mobility, supplies, and coordination, it can be beaten in motion. Patton did not defeat German forces only by killing them. He defeated them by forcing them to move in ways that destroyed their ability to act as an organized whole. The pursuit toward Paris and beyond becomes the visible proof that a major German field army in the West has been broken. For American troops, the victory feels real, but it is not clean. They see destroyed vehicles on roads, abandoned guns, and long lines of prisoners moving back under guard. They also see their own men worn down by the pace and the constant awareness that the war is not over. Every mile gained still carries risk, and every day of pursuit is paid for in fatigue and loss. In the end, the battle's meaning is not found in a single dramatic moment. It is found in the slow realization on both sides that modern war can be decided by tempo as much as firepower. In August 1944, German command structures could not accept reality fast enough to stop the collapse. Patton's speed turned that failure into irreversible defeat. And for the men who survived the pocket, the road east was not a victory march. It was the beginning of a retreat that would not truly end until Germany itself was reached.